Although many barriers remain, there is also hope. More voices are being heard, more allies are standing up, and more pathways are being forged toward a future where true equality can be realized. Will these systemic barriers ever completely fall? Only time will tell. But history has shown us that every effort toward justice matters, and every fight for equality brings us closer to the society we want to see. A society where all people, regardless of their race, can have equal opportunities to thrive. The journey toward financial stability and prosperity for Black Americans has been a grueling struggle, characterized by systemic barriers that obstruct the path to economic empowerment. For many, the basic necessities required for a dignified life have become a battleground. Access to quality education, widely recognized as a cornerstone for societal progress, has faced numerous obstacles deeply rooted in discriminatory practices. These barriers, entrenched in the fabric of American society, have often led to the denial of equal educational opportunities, crushing the dreams of countless African Americans striving to improve their circumstances. Moreover, the promise of equal opportunity has been undermined by pervasive prejudice, leaving many within the Black community grappling with limited access to essential resources that could uplift their neighborhoods. Housing, often seen as a symbol of stability and progress, has been another arena where discrimination has reigned. Segregation not only confined Black families to neighborhoods marked by neglect and insufficient resources, but also perpetuated a cycle of poverty that became increasingly difficult to escape. The aspiration for homeownership, a tangible representation of freedom and stability, has been frequently obstructed by discriminatory lending practices. These practices have systematically disadvantaged Black families, ensuring that the dream of owning a home remained out of reach for many. The impact of these barriers extends far beyond individual families. It resonates through entire communities, stifling economic growth and reinforcing social inequities. Throughout history, leaders have played pivotal roles in shaping these narratives. Yet, there have been countless instances where they have failed to take action, even when the opportunity for meaningful change presented itself. Reflecting on these moments, it's crucial to remember the opportunities that have been missed in addressing the profound injustices stemming from slavery. One significant opportunity arose in the aftermath of the Civil War, when General William Tecumseh Sherman signed Field Order 15. This groundbreaking order sought to allocate 400,000 acres of confiscated Confederate land to freed Black families, envisioning a path toward economic empowerment and self-sufficiency. Sherman's initiative aimed to provide a foundation for Black Americans to build their futures and reclaim their rights as citizens. However, the promise of reparations and economic independence was tragically dashed when President Andrew Johnson reversed Sherman's order, reinstating the land to former slave owners. This decision not only negated the potential for Black families to establish roots and build wealth, but also perpetuated a cycle of disempowerment that would echo through generations. The failure to implement reparations during this critical juncture highlights the ongoing struggle for justice and equality faced by Black Americans. In reflecting on these historical events, it's essential to recognize that the path to financial stability and true empowerment for Black communities remains fraught with challenges. Yet, understanding this history is vital for fostering discussions about reparations, equality, and the necessary steps to dismantle systemic barriers that continue to exist today. We invite you to join us in this conversation and support our efforts in bringing awareness to these important issues. By subscribing to our channel and liking our videos, you contribute to building a strong community committed to seeking justice and understanding.
Part 2 of Chapter 8, Becoming Politically and Economically Competitive in America. Strategy 4, Black Underemployment and Unemployment. Black men, women, and children were kidnapped and transported all over the world for one purpose: to work and to produce white wealth. Until the mid-20th century, they represented America's true and senior labor system. In nearly every instance, the white lower class functioned as a management class over Blacks, though in modern times they refer to themselves as the working blue-collar class. The lower white class supported blacks in jobs ranging from picking cotton and digging ditches to working on the assembly lines of large automotive plants. The value of black labor has always been controlled by the white community. Since blacks had few employment alternatives, they were relegated to the dirtiest and hardest jobs. Blacks' highest rate of underemployment and unemployment were reflections of their expendability. They lived by the rule of being the last hired and the first fired. And here's an analysis. One, capitalistic democracies have historically accepted a certain level of unemployment as a necessary public good and permitted businesses to use unemployment as a device for maintaining low wages. The acceptable range of overall unemployment is typically 5%. While recent white unemployment rates rarely exceed 5%, the National Urban League Hidden Unemployment Index estimates that jobless rates among black adults is 4 to 5 times higher than the jobless rate among white adults. Meanwhile, more than 50% of eligible black youths can't find jobs. Though this systematic black unemployment criminalizes blacks and renders them non-competitive, neither the government nor larger society has demonstrated a willingness to use their vast resources to eliminate the causative factors. Number two, over the years, blacks have consistently asked for but seldom receive employment assistance from government. Following their 250 years of full employment as slaves, blacks asked the government to give each black slave family 40 acres and a mule. Government responded by reshackling them into nearly another century of semi-slavery called sharecropping. In the dying years of the civil rights protest period, blacks held national demonstrations in support of Humphrey Hawkins' full employment bill. A conservative backlash led by major corporations and politicians killed the bill by claiming that the government, not the private sector, will have to hire blacks. Approximately 70% of black college graduates are employed in government because there is no black business infrastructure capable of absorbing them. Number three, entrenched high unemployment is a direct result of the fragmentation within the black community. They lack the resources and commitment to create employment opportunities, and they do not spend their disposable incomes wisely. Even if they had full employment, it would not alleviate the myriad of problems facing them. Wealth is the primary problem. Employment is secondary. There's a big difference between having a job and having wealth. Jobs are not designed to create wealth. They are instead to keep employees on one payday away from the poorhouse and to satisfy workers' basic consumer needs. Real wealth is accumulated via investment returns and ownership profits. Number four, the 20 years between 1969 and 1989 saw the introduction of controversial affirmative action policies, supposedly to compensate black employees for past discrimination in the job market. Conservatives vehemently opposed these policies, charging that affirmative action unfairly advantaged and entrenched blacks at the expense of whites. However, statistics suggest that affirmative action brought few real changes in the position of black employees. Between 1969 and 1989, black annual income increased by only $22 relative to white income. Moreover, from 1979 to 1989, overall black income increased only $1. Number five is low-paying minimum wage jobs are more attractive to immigrants than blacks, right? Immigrants see these low-wage jobs as temporary stops on their way to a better life. It is a way of paying their dues. Blacks have paid nearly 4 centuries of dues, but they never had reasons to be optimistic that a minimum wage job would lead them up the economic ladder. For them, those jobs were not temporary. They were permanent. Minimum wage jobs for blacks are a form of labor exploitation, a waste of brain power, and another cause of low self-respect. Limited employment opportunity is a major difference between black and white communities. The lack of private sector employment opportunity within black communities forces blacks to seek income from government jobs, welfare assistance, and sometimes criminal activities. All of these sources are condemned by conservatives. Yet these same conservatives frequently resist policy changes that would create private sector alternatives in Black American communities. Moreover, conservatives are the primary exploiters of government and general public through their immoral and unfair business practices. Now let's look at some recommendations. Blacks must accept that nobody owes Blacks jobs or full employment. Blacks must assume the burden of providing employment for their own people. The burden rests upon the shoulders of the Black business community and those businesses located within the communities. Discrimination in hiring practices of businesses within Black communities has long been a problem, especially with Hispanic and Asian merchants. These groups have cultures that stress hiring from their own group. They often hire people from their homeland, even for menial labor before hiring Blacks. They can retain their They can remain their choice. That can remain their choice. But the Black community must insist that these ethnic merchants reinvest in the community. They must insist that these ethnic merchants reinvest in the community. Blacks should initiate measures to halt the brain drain from their communities by creating employment, business opportunities, and incentives within Black communities to attract and keep the best Black minds within the community. With appropriate employment and business opportunities, the best Black brain power could devote time, energies, and intellect to taking care of Black communities. The handful of Blacks working on Wall Street or in corporate boardrooms does not represent group progress. I'm going to read that one more time. Make sure you're hearing me. The handful of Blacks working on Wall Street or in corporate boardrooms does not represent group progress. These advances may help individual Blacks, but do little for Blacks as a race. If a large number of Blacks who receive business training sought to develop their own businesses in Black communities rather than seeking to integrate into white businesses, the wealth of Blacks in America would expand beyond its stagnant 2% range. And it is likely that these businesses would be larger and more powerful than the mom and pop operations that currently make up the majority of Black businesses. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Happy Monday. This is On the Shoulders of Giants. I am Joseph Ward, continuing my reading of Dr. Claude Anderson's amazing book, Black Labor, White Wealth, The Search for Power and Economic Justice. This is chapter 8, Becoming Politically and Economically Competitive in America. And this is the second half of chapter 8. I picked up on strategy 4, which is Black underemployment and Black unemployment. And that's what we're reading about. And that's what we're talking about, the advantages that white America got to help build the wealth that they have, all while creating false narratives to say that Black people are always asking for handouts and Black people got handouts. And that is the way that we have been able to pick ourselves up in America, when actually the reverse is true. If it wasn't for governmental handouts, white people would not have the wealth and the gains that they actually have. Even the so-called handouts that were given to Black people did not fully benefit Black people. They mainly benefited white people or non-Black people, but mainly white people, right? And Black people were the ones usually getting the crumbs from the so-called affirmative action plans that were so-called created to empower and uplift Black people, basically the boots and the straps. But we never really got the boots and the straps. They just gave us shoestrings and said, put your boots on and pull yourself up by your bootstraps, but we only have shoestrings. While other groups of people who were supposed to get the boots and the straps that were slated for us, they got what they needed. And so Dr. Anderson has a point. And a lot of the conservative commentary that I listen to, conservatives, they find specific points and they stick on those points. But if you really know your history and your information and you press them, the arguments fall apart, because they're always talking about Black people getting a handout, affirmative action, the government taking care of Black people at the expense of white people. That's why they're so against reparations. But they're not just against the checks when it comes to reparations. And we have to understand that. They're not just against Black people getting checks. Of course, they don't want us to get an economic boost. But true reparations, like I keep saying, true reparations will be an equal redistribution. And this is from Dr. Anderson. True reparations will be an equal redistribution of wealth, power, land, and resources. And that will cripple the system of white supremacy in America. Now, that wouldn't cripple the system of white supremacy globally, but it would cripple the system of white supremacy in America. And you got to understand how important America is to the system of white supremacy. It's an important stalwart or citadel within the system of white supremacy. You know, we're talking world power, a nation that's a world power, and a nation that is a world power who supports and pushes white supremacy. So it is imperative for the white power structure to continue to suppress Black people. Now, as Dr. Anderson stated, Black people, he told us that we will be relegated to third to fourth class citizens, and we are now relegated to third and fourth class citizens. And we've always fought from behind, but now we're fighting from behind and in the hole. So we have to dig ourselves out of the hole and get back to fighting from behind. But we got to get out of the hole first. And so this is Dr. Anderson giving us strategies to help us get ourselves out of the hole. So let's get back to reading. This is page 192, strategy 5, Black and white psychosocial behavior patterns. Blacks have been acculturated, domesticated, and integrated, but never assimilated into white society. Assimilation is the process by which a majority group learns the values and norms of the dominant culture and is then absorbed into that dominant culture. After 400 years, Blacks have not been absorbed. The legacy of separation remains very strong. It is unlikely that whites will ever freely absorb Blacks, regardless of how Blacks conform to the cultural standards of white America. If conformity and acculturation were key criteria for Black assimilation, then white society would have absorbed Blacks years ago. Slavery and Jim Crowism were socializing and conditioning process that stripped Blacks of their sense of humanity and self-sufficiency. Blacks responded to these conditioning processes by developing their behavior patterns that reflected a unique Black personality. They were systematically rewarded for displaying behaviors that conform to white standards, especially those that help whites maintain their power and privileged positions. For example, Black slaves were rewarded for helping white slaveholders to maintain control over slaves by informing on any activities among their fellow slaves that might have endangered whites, Though it may be uncomfortable for some to acknowledge, there are some Blacks who are still selling Black America for personal gain. They clothe themselves in the uniform of the day. Sexism, conservatism, and various other isms, what I said. But in each instance, among such Blacks, the welfare of the larger Black community comes last, if it is considered at all, because a lot of Black people are only out for self because it's easier for them to find their comfortable places within the system of white America. That's what me and Brother Henry Rawls just got through talking about this past Saturday. Black people who can't cut the mustard as far as the revolutionary path, they are the people who, if you can't beat them, join them. So they do their best to assimilate into a system that don't want them or need them in the way that they think they're needed. So let's get into some analysis of Black and white psychosocial behavior before we get into some of these recommendations. All right. Humans have enslaved other humans for a variety of reasons as a result of indebtedness, religious differences, and military defeats. Skin color was never a major factor until around the 14th century. Color entered the enslavement equation from two opposing directions. Firstly, the Mamelukes, who were the last known group of whites to be enslaved, revolted forcefully and vengefully against the Arabs and generally signaled an end to all white enslavement. When the white indentured service system started several hundred years ago, it was managed via contract and mutual agreement, which limited terms, no punishment systems, and bonus compensation at the close of the contracts. Secondly, Arabs imposed slavery, the Islamic faith, and the Swahili language on Black Africans to get across the control of their wealth and natural resources. Arabs began enslaving and trading Blacks around 800 AD, according to various sources. Arabs are still using color as the basis for enslavement and are still slave trading in the countries of Saudi Arabia, Mauritania, Sierra Leone, Libya, and the Sudan. Number two, Black slavery was totally unlike any other form of slavery. Various Asian and Hispanic nations were colonized, but the inhabitants were never animalized, commercialized, and traded as slaves in international markets. Although Blacks failed the lesson that the Marmadukes taught the world, the American Indian did not. When European whites attempted to enslave American Indians, the Indians simply refused to perform the role of slaves. Only Blacks were branded as slaves for the world, and the exploitation for that must be more than whites' loathing of Black skin color. There were East Indians, Moors, and Arabs who were just as dark, if not darker, than West African Blacks, yet they were not enslaved. In the opinion of this writer, Blacks alone were branded as slaves primarily because Africa remained disunited as a result of tribal structures in sub-Saharan Africa, while their natural wealth made all tribes targets of hostile foreigners. Sub-Saharan Africans alone would submit to brutal slavery and a perpetual subordinate status. After centuries of oppression, Blacks have yet to come together as a strong community and conduct self-empowerment activities that will free them from oppression. Instead, Blacks have such little self-respect that they continue to pursue integration, a progress that fragments and weakens them. 3, the rewards of meritorious manumission. The law that rewarded Black slaves who sold out their brothers and sisters has created a legacy that is still with us. Blacks have no balancing social devices that punish those Blacks who sacrifice members of the race for their own personal advantage. Nor do Blacks have a device for rewarding whites who extend themselves to assist Blacks. Black America is void of social accountability, policies, and enforcement devices. Number 4, it is highly unlikely that white conservatives will permit governments to assist Blacks because true social changes will give Blacks access to all of the resources and privileges enjoyed by whites, as well as cultivate the potential for Black empowerment. Such a transfer or sharing of resources would create a new labor, business, and political competition that would threaten the middle class status of whites. Consequently, recorded history indicates that Blacks should not count on the goodwill or moral obligation of white society. Since Blacks made marginal gains in income and educational achievements in the 1960s, whites have grown increasingly callous and indifferent to Blacks and their problems. They urge Blacks to heal themselves, yet simultaneously block access to resources necessary for such healing. They resist any form of civil rights legislation for Blacks, even when the impact of the legislation would be minimal. A survey by the American Jewish Committee indicated that even in 1990, most white Americans believe any changes in Blacks' present conditions would be too much and too fast. They oppose any kind of government-sponsored social engineering that is designed to redistribute wealth to Blacks and relive the oppression conditions of Black America. All right, now let's get into some recommendations. Number 1, Blacks must first establish control standards for acceptable social behavior and jettison behavior patterns that render them economically non-competitive. Blacks must openly acknowledge that certain behavior is detrimental to the race and must be changed. They can no longer excuse destructive behavior by hiding within the frail walls of civil rights issues or charging it to poverty, politics, or the legacies of slavery. True, that bullshit that we listen and we don't judge. That's bullshit. Black people have no accountability for our destructive and degenerate actions at all, at large. As a matter of fact, Black people have gone to the extent of, like Dr. Anderson is saying, excusing the behavior, but they've taken it a step further to encouraging and celebrating and romanticizing it. Degenerate Black people are seen as authentically Black. And if you're not a degenerate Black or the ratchet Black, then you're not really Black because you act white, because acting like you got some damn sense has now become acting white, because the people who believe that authentic blackness is the ratchet behavior, they have been socially engineered into believing that the worst behavior traits is what black people is what we really are. Like, they really believe all of the negativity that have been said about black people. That is who we are. It's been beaten into their brain. So they really believe that authentic blackness, you're not really black if you're not acting like a thug, you're not acting like a hoe, you're not out here being destructive and degenerate. If you act like you got some sense, you must be acting white, and that's a problem. Number two, blacks should strive to participate more equitably and fully in all aspects of American society. To do so, we must exercise greater responsibility in the development and control of their communities. They must sever the dependence upon the white communities for solutions to their problems. America is a competitive society, and the chances of it being changed simply to accommodate non-competitive blacks is remote. Blacks must acquire enough wealth and political power to change their conditions. The realization of these goals will require leadership that is trained, experienced, devoted, visionary, and representative of the best black minds. Number three, black institutions, churches, schools, families, and other social organizations must assert themselves regarding the problems facing Black America. They must establish and promote codes of conduct to protect their communities from Black antisocial and dysfunctional behaviors. These fundamental institutions should cooperatively use a variety of social tools to persuade members of the Black race to comply with certain behavior standards. Social tools, including sanctions, rewards, and punishments, must not only encourage respect and unity for the group, but should also instill trepidation to potential visitors. Black institutions must define and teach those roles, values, and beliefs, but must also house enforcement powers. Neither law enforcement, politicians, nor the military can bring about community togetherness. The lessons of the civil strife in Somalia, Haiti, and Bosnia should soon make this point clear. Only those who live in the community can make it safe, positive, and an enjoyable place to live. Only we can change our immediate living conditions in the communities and neighborhoods that we live in if we choose to be better, live better. But we have to be willing to create a new environment, be willing to work to create a new environment. Strategy 6, building a strong sense of community. Since for many years, Blacks lacked sufficient power to protect themselves, their families, and their communities, they were unable to develop a strong sense of community. However, their sense of community and peoplehood was stronger prior to the 1954 Supreme Court desegregation decision than it is today. Prior to the decision, segregation forced Blacks to be independent and more unified. It forced Blacks to do that. Black people didn't want to do it, but Black people were forced to do it, right? They were concerned about the welfare of others in their group. They valued and respected Black role models and aspired to emulate them. They imposed sanctions and consequences upon members who caused disruptions. For instance, elders were more willing to admonish and help teach neighborhood children right from wrong, right? And now people are off. People don't want nobody to tell their little stank children nothing. Well, raise your child right. Let's get into some analysis. The minority and immigrant labels, when applied to Blacks, are not only misleading, but injurious because they mask the unique history and status of Black Americans. Blacks were never immigrants by definition or in terms of treatment that has been accorded them. And they have systematically been kept in a minority status to prevent them from acquiring power and wealth. Even when they were the majority in Louisiana, Mississippi, Georgia, Alabama, and South Carolina, they were still powerless. And today, as majority populations in large cities, they are still powerless as a group. Integration in its present form deters Blacks from establishing and maintaining a strong sense of community, togetherness, and peoplehood. It engenders abandonment of the strong cultural traditions and values of Black heritage. The process contains some of the same conditioning techniques employed in slavery. For instance, integration places Blacks in a position of numerical weakness, subject to being monitored and controlled, rewarded or punished by whites. It forces blacks to be loyal to and identify with the dominant white society. Some blacks, perhaps out of a lack of racial pride or naivete, do not see the negative results of integration in its present form and continue to pursue it regardless of how often they are rejected or exploited. Number three, integration gives the illusion that a racial or ethnic group's numerical size is unimportant. We keep emphasizing this. Nothing could be further from the truth. Democratic societies operate on one basic principle, that the majority wins and unity is power. In competitive group politics and economics, the integrating group is disabled, especially when it doesn't stick together. By fragmenting its numbers, they become permanent losers. Losers. I want that to stick. I hope that stung, because it should sting all of us to know that we choose to be on the losing team. We choose to operate like losers. I hope that stung, because it stung me, and I don't like that. Integration works only when blacks stay in their assigned, subordinate, powerless, scattered patterns. Whites generally support integration as long as it doesn't increase the presence of blacks beyond 5 to 8%. When that happens, they generally feel that their positions, personal security, and prestige and wealth are threatened. All right. So Dr. Anderson gives us some recommendations. So 1, blacks must cease using the term minority and resist any other categorical, ambiguous term that equates them or other racial, ethnic, gender, or class groups. Centuries of statutory enslavement, exploitation, and subordination have imposed unique problems and conditions upon blacks. By using blacks as a model of readdressing grievances, any group that perceives itself as aggrieved gets the thrill without the bill. In other words, they get the advantages of being perceived as victims without having endured the historical suffering of blacks, and they gain greater acceptance within mainstream white society by being self-sufficient and conservative. All black self-empowerment activities must contribute to building a strong sense of peoplehood and commitment to the accumulation of principle and taking care of oneself, one's family, and one's race. A true sense of peoplehood is not the same as the rhetoric of brotherhood and sisterhood. Like whites, blacks will have differences of opinion and interracial differences and disagreements. But black lives are interconnected by virtue of their color. So blacks must be committed to moving towards mutually beneficial goals. The principle extends to international business and dealings with African and Caribbean nations. Black Americans and Black Africans should first learn to deal with Black nations to which they have natural links before dealing with white colonists. Power will increase in direct proportion to the degree of unity among Black people. Blacks should develop a sense of community togetherness, partnered after white society. For centuries, white society has been solidly committed to European ethnic culture and attitudes about race and power. Their strong sense of peoplehood has permitted them to go to war with other members of their community, yet regroup and fight common enemies. Whites' sense of community helps them to prioritize issues and people and to decide how to best to employ their wealth and power for the good of their group. Number 4, blacks must recapture the sense of national black community that they had before the 1960 civil rights protest period. Black cooperation and unity are essential tools for building empowerment, especially within the critically short time frame that remains. There will be little time for petty power struggles during the next decade. A Washington-based black think tank, the Harvest Institute, is currently being formed to provide some guidance in this area, and that is Dr. Anderson's think tank. Number 5 is blacks must recapture the nation's conscience by building and operating a Black Holocaust and Black History Museum in the nation's capital. That has been done, but Black people didn't build it. White people built it. It should be designed to convey the psychological, socioeconomic, and political impact of slavery and Jim Crow, considering the contributions that blacks made to American modern civilization. Such a museum should stand as an equal to its nation's most revered museums and monuments. Moreover, it would elevate the Black historical role from a footnote to a major text. It should submerge visitors in the depthfulness of the Black American experience and the amazing productivity of a people under siege. So, Black people didn't build the museum, white people did, and now it's being reconstructed. But the museum, I visited the Black Smithsonian Museum in Washington. I was very underwhelmed. Very underwhelmed. It was sanitized Black history. It was definitely bougie, boule Black history. But that's what happened when you don't build your own museum from the grassroots, right? Black Americans must alter the way they see themselves economically, socially, and politically if they are to change the way others see them. Black history must be taught in totality and in a new context. It must emphasize the outstanding productivity and the contributions Blacks have made to capitalism, the Industrial Revolution, and American society in general. Black history ought not to be limited to the contributions of a few Blacks. Instead, it should demonstrate Blacks' massive labor and wealth productivity. It should focus on how they produce wealth, food, clothing, and shelter for generations of non-Blacks around the world. The history ought to show the uniqueness and enduring strength of the Black culture that gave America its only true art forms: Black music, dance, art, and language. A Black Holocaust and History Museum would provide a proper context for a long overdue recognition of Black America's original labor class. But Black people, we have to build that for ourselves. Strategy 7, role of institutions. Toes about to get stepped on in this one. Black institutions such as churches, community agencies, and fraternal organizations are needed to reestablish a broad sense of community and peoplehood. Their historical roles and resources must be broadened and linked via a national plan. The analysis is there's no interlinking of Black churches and social and political organizations. Thus, they continue to operate independently, taking money out of Black America rather than bringing it in. These organizations spend millions of dollars annually on travel, meetings, hotels, entertainment, and food. Little, if any, of this wealth goes back into the Black community. They have no master plans designed to alter the marginal existence of Blacks. Recommendations. Though the social political role of Black churches has diminished over the past 2 decades or past 2 generations, they're still a unifying force. They can play an even more important role by not providing religious training, but assisting in the economic development and rebuilding of Black America. With a new commitment to a broad Black community, Black churches could initiate and mandate a call to the Black Americans who drifted from the churches or joined white churches. Church service should be spiritually uplifting, but they must also be sources of information and motivation about the requirements for unity. With its audience of millions, the Black church will not only be able to pool large amounts of money, but could also communicate the need for Blacks to become better educated and more thrifty. It could also sponsor scholarships, stimulate economic development through developing credit unions, food cooperatives, union land programs, and other enterprises. Some churches have started to move in this direction and provide models that others can follow. Other social and political organizations could pursue the same goals via similar activities. Number 2 recommendation. Black church members should insist that their churches become more accountable for the billions that they annually extract from Black communities through tithing and contributions. Some of these fines should be directed towards strengthening the community. That could be made available to Black entrepreneurs through capital formation pools or regional economic development banks controlled by various denominations. Black ministers could assist further by preaching about the need for Blacks to practice capitalism and group economics. The nursery schools and kindergarten should teach unity and economic self-sufficiency. Strategy 8, government resources. White society has always maintained full control of government and used it as a tool for acquiring and maintaining wealth. Though assisted by government in their maldistribution of power and wealth, conservative forces oppose any use of government to correct the imbalances by helping Blacks to gain wealth. Taxes are the only established device for redistributing wealth in America. Anti-government forces understand that without tax revenues, government would not be able to assist blacks who have been abused by the powerful. Here's the analysis. The conservative movement to prioritize government services could have serious negative consequences for blacks because limited private sector employment opportunities force a large percentage of working blacks to earn their income from government jobs. Meanwhile, unemployed blacks depend on government for assistance and benefits. Number two, Black Africa is beginning to privatize. Free of European colonial powers and socialistic ideologies, African nations have begun to privatize or sell state-owned assets and business opportunities for entrepreneurs. Black Americans should explore the opportunity to purchase some of these properties. They should also seriously explore opportunities to establish vertical businesses with Africa. Cuban and other Hispanic groups are already developing plans to gain control of privatized resources in Africa. John Nasbitt and Patricia Aberdeen in Megatrends 2000 identify industries within various African states that are in process of privatization. Nigeria plans to sell its stake in 160 state-owned banks, breweries, and insurance companies. Kenya plans to divest the state's interest in more than 400 enterprises. Mozambique has reportedly privatized more than 20 industrial plants since 1985. Tanzania plans to seek managers to take over state-run hotels and game lodges. Angola, Benin, and Congo plan to sell mining, fishing, and construction companies. Togo began privatizing services and companies in 1988. Many African countries in privatizing aspects of telecommunications and seeking new communication technologies and program resources. These business opportunities could provide blacks with a vital link to industrial development. But let the buyer beware. This will not be a giveaway, and due diligence is required. Some of these businesses may be overpriced or have poor products and obsolete equipment. Yet, even in view of potential shortcomings, these African sell-offs are worth investigating. So remember, this book was written in 1994. So these opportunities may not exist, but what I will say is continue to look for opportunities to invest and increase wealth. Number three, in America, local governments could establish quasi-public leading institutions funded by assets converted from confiscated properties and funds programs. In 1988, the Federal Drug Enforcement Agency reported that it had confiscated properties worth nearly $700 million. These programs could produce revenue by converting inactive funds and property into funds directed towards the good of the community from which the funds came. The funds could be made available to Black entrepreneurs through low-interest, long-term loans. The Black businesses would pay interest and taxes to city governments and create jobs. 4, local governments could offer land grants and head rights on abandoned ghetto properties to Black individuals or corporations that need land or industrial or business development. Additionally, tax incentives as discussed earlier, could encourage development. Government could formulate partnerships with Black businesses and industries by purchasing a specific amount of services and goods from Black businesses situated within various municipal boundaries. Governments could offer subsidies to Black industries that hired hardcore, underemployed, and unemployed Blacks. Funds could be reallocated from funds currently used to pay government assistance and the needy in Black communities, and from the confiscation of funds described earlier. All right. And so we get into the last strategy. The last strategy is political empowerment. What is the political system about? And why is the possession of political power important to a group? Group power is important because the distribution of economic, social rewards, and benefits within the broad society is the major role of a political system. The group with the greatest political power will receive the greatest benefits. For nearly 400 years, the United States' immigration policies have been used to contain Black populations at non-threatening and controllable levels. Black percentages exceeding 5 to 8% generated white backlashes. In a democratic society founded on the principle that the majority wins, the racial or ethnic group with the largest population always gets its way. National immigration policies and the integration process have restricted Black immigrants from entering the country and scattered them as minorities among whites. Such practices have co-signed Blacks to a constant numerical minority and therefore to a perpetual loser status. After emancipation, Blacks struggled harder than any other group in the country to overcome barriers erected to prevent their participation in the political process. Voter registration and education drives were major components to the civil rights movement. The Black vote became a decisive factor in all levels of elections. Blacks could proudly take credit for electing white candidates as members of state legislatures, mayors, governors, and presidents. They were equally successful in delivering Black candidates to public offices. However, increased political gains do not mean improved conditions for Blacks. Analysis. 1. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 increased Black voting strengths and opened the doors to unprecedented growth in the number of Black elected officials. Unfortunately, the material benefit to Blacks did not increase in proportion to the increase in Black representation. Even in large urban areas with a strong tradition of Black participation in local, state, and national government, it appears that material dividends to Blacks have been either minimal or non-existent. Judging by the meager rewards and benefits that Blacks have received from the political system, the real question is, should Blacks continue to participate in politics as they have in the past, right? Throughout history, Black office holders have been neither numerous nor especially influential. Most entered and left office without altering Black America's conditions. More often, they lacked power and direction and had few resources from which to draw support. There have been little quid pro quo for Blacks who put candidates into public office. This results primarily from the fact that white society controls nearly all aspects of government, and it will not easily let government be used to help Blacks. Another drawback is Black political appointees. The reality of the political process makes it easier for them to bury themselves in the business of taking care of the general public's business rather than proposing issues and programs to specifically improve the quality of life for Blacks. They feel safer being good public servants rather than Black employees with an agenda of their own. There's often little noticeable difference between them and their non-Black predecessors or counterparts. They lose sight of the reason that Blacks fought for the right to vote. Blacks do not vote solely for good government. They vote for candidates who think they will bring them proportional returns. When elected officials or their appointees fail to support Black people's interests, Blacks must do whatever it is necessary to bring the candidate and its appointees to task. Number 4, politicians are becoming more open in expressing opposition to Black issues. They sense that these issues have been successfully closeted or placed on the back burner. After a major election is over, mainstream society expresses fatigue from hearing about race issues. That's what they're talking now, Black fatigue, because this after a major election, right? Blacks comfort them by discussing mainstream issues in public and political forums. The Republican Party, for instance, espouses that it is interested in increasing Blacks' membership under their Big Tent platform. In truth, their interest in Black voters stops at the point where they feel that they have diluted the Black bloc of votes that traditionally supports the Democratic Party. They do not want to attract hordes of Blacks because they do not want to tarnish themselves with too many Black Republicans. If a massive number of Blacks registered as Republicans, most whites will become Democrats. If a large number of Blacks register as Democrats, most whites will become Republicans. If Blacks split their registration evenly between both the Democratic and Republican parties, whites would be very happy. If Blacks develop a national plan and begin acquiring self-sufficiency, wealth, and power, whites will be unable to predict the Black vote and would be forced to develop other strategies. But Black people keep wanting to be either Democratic or Republican and not create something for our own ourselves politically that could give us some kind of power, right? Recommendations. 1, without wealth, power, Blacks without wealth and power, without wealth and power, Blacks as a numerical minority cannot hold public office holders accountable. An office holder needs the majority of the votes and campaign financing. If Blacks cannot offer both, they have no control over the candidate except when a narrow amount of support is needed to tip the scales. Even then, a white candidate has to be careful not to be overly identified with a group perceived as poor and powerless. Blacks must unify and form a critical mass that politicians cannot dismiss and must reward. 2, the damage inflicted by non-accountable office holders will eventually compound and render Blacks even more non-threatening. They must financially support their candidates and demand accountability for their investments. Like wealthy Jewish or corporate groups, they must hold politicians accountable by withholding their support during subsequent elections. But Black people be so scared to do that. I don't want other people to win. In their political activities, Blacks should stress that the most important issues for them is not political partisanship. The issue is race. There are Blacks who swear by one political party or another, while whites switch political parties to make the bottom line come out right. During their enslavement, Blacks did not belong to any political party. From the end of the Civil War, after the Great Depression, Blacks primarily belonged to the Republican Party, but they were subordinated, lynched, and segregated. From the late 1940s until today, about 85, which is now 92%, of all registered Black voters have become Democrats, and Black America is still excluded and subordinated. This suggests that regardless of the degree of Black political involvement, Black conditions remain unchanged. Therefore, Blacks ought to consider starting their own party and run their own candidates for public office. Blacks will have very little to lose since very few Black public office holders win elections on the white vote. If nothing else, an independent political party would get Blacks public forums, financial support, candidates committed to the Black community, and white respect for having some backbone. Black businesses must shoulder their share of the responsibility to support Black political candidates. Black businesses are the first to ask for political favors and usually give the least in return. Consequently, Black political candidates are weakened because they have to depend upon white contributions. It is difficult, if not impossible, for Black public office holders to be outspoken and supportive of Black causes if they are dependent upon white dollars. Whites only support Black candidates who are non-threatening to the power, wealth, and privilege of the white lifestyle. And that is chapter 8. That is chapter 8, becoming politically and economically competitive. I've stated it several times, and I agree with Dr. Anderson that we have to create our own political party. We have to build our own political strength and become a force politically and make people look at us, respect us, and take our vote serious, and not just expect to get our vote, but you have to actually work for our vote. What I love about it is we're not just talking about the issue, but we're giving solutions. Black labor, white wealth, the search for power, and economic justice. We're giving solutions to the issues, right? So 9 strategies to help become politically and economically competitive in America, within the world, and to change the fate and the future of Black America. Nobody's going to change that for us. We got to get up, get out, and get something. We got to stop waiting on our enemies to save us. So we are down to the last chapter and the epilogue of the book. So the next video will be the last video for Black Labor, White Wealth. I've enjoyed reading this book, and I know I'm going to enjoy reading this last chapter. Great choice by you all. And of course, getting ready to put up the next 4 choices that we're going to be reading moving forward. The link to get this book, if you haven't already, you're tripping. But the link to get the book is in the description. Make sure you get it. The link to support On the Shoulders of Giants is in the description. The link to the website is in the description. Make sure you're supporting everything that we got. I appreciate you all, especially everybody who enjoys this content. And I'm going to keep putting it out and keep doing my thiggity thing. Y'all already know how we do. Joseph Ward coming straight from the South, Tallahassee, Florida. I do what I do. Want to give a big shout out to Patrick Irvin, Professor Carl Tone Jones, my Black History School students, my Black History School parents, and everybody who supports me, what I got going on. My mama Inez, my pops Wallace, my brothers Wallace, Herman, and Matthew. Shout out to my lady Tiffany. Shout out to my homies Caleb, Doc, Muhammad, Pat, Carl, Eddie, Chaka, everybody, the homies, man. I love y'all. And let's keep doing what we do. One time for my dog, Robert Stigger. He back in town. I love you, cuz. Everybody, man. Everybody who support what we do. Everybody in Paris. Man, we got people in Paris supporting on the Shows of Giants. I appreciate you. Me, Kim, everybody who continue to support what we have going on over here. Y'all are the greatest. Catch y'all on the other side.